Stacy Donald with That Writing Life with Dr. D. Thanks for joining me. I thought that I would do a quick tutorial on writing a short or even a longer humanities paper where you need a thesis. I find that with my students, asking them to have an overarching thesis statement that informs their paper, something for the whole paper to focus on, to tie the paper together, tends to strike fear in the heart of even the stoutest student. And I know that writing in the humanities is often a new experience for a lot of students. So I thought we would jump in and talk about quickly kind of how to get to the point of having good information for your paper and also a strong thesis for your paper. So let's get going. The first thing we're going to have to do is some pre-writing. I know that most of us just want to get going as quick as we can because we are in a hurry up culture and we have a lot to do, lots of things on our plates, but pre-writing is something that you can't skip. I know a lot of students think it'll be faster if they sit down and start with a blank page and just start writing. But actually what happens is the end result is not as good. You don't get as good a grade. If you submit it to your professor for feedback, they're often going to say, this looks like pre-writing to me. This needs an organizational structure. So if you do this work on the front end, you're going to have less revision to do on the back end and you're going to wind up getting a better grade. So I promise it is totally worth the effort to do some pre-writing. And for a humanities paper, here is a good start on pre-writing. So this is stuff that you want to make notes on and make a copious amount of notes. Make as many notes as you possibly can. Pretty rapidly, because the more that you have in your pre-writing, the more that you're going to have to draw from for your actual essay. So what do you pre-write about? The first thing is going to be museum context. So I know for most of my classes, students are asked to find an artifact. So an artifact in the humanities is going to be a song, a novel, a poem, a piece of architecture, or any of the other visual arts. I will often send my students on virtual museum tours to go find something to write about. And almost all museums these days offer their collections online where you can see them and choose an artifact, and they have all the information about the artifacts and about where the artifact is in the museum, almost like you were there. So it's really handy. So one thing I always want from my students in the introduction is some context for the artifact. So what museum did you find it in, if it indeed came from a museum? What collection is it part of? Is it part of the museum's permanent collection? Is it part of a temporary exhibition? How does it fit into the collection or the exhibition? Like maybe what else is included around it? And you don't need to put a whole lot of this in your paper, but write down as much as you can find out about it in your notes, just so that you have good information to choose from. So then the bulk of your pre-writing is going to be then going through your who, what, when, where, why, and how. And this you're going to write as much as you can. And I'd like for you to write as much as you can about each one of these. First, with just what do you know off the top of your head. And some of them you won't really be able to do that, but some of them you will. And then the rest you're going to research. And one critical thing about doing research in your pre-writing phase, in the humanities, it's really easy to plagiarize because there's so much available online about our subject matter. So if you are doing online research to answer some of the who, what, when, where, and why, and how, you're going to want to make sure that you just jot down a note of where you got that information from. Make sure you jot down enough of a note so that you can go back and find that resource to use it in your works cited paper, your references paper, or whatever formatting system you're using for your university. My next video is actually going to be about using APA format. So this is why I suggest that you do the pre-writing. So you definitely want to do the pre-writing to help give you a good organized start. So I'm going to give you an example of our hurry up culture and how it's sometimes to our detriment. So I like to cook. My family likes it when I cook for them. I'm always scouring the internet and Pinterest and whatever for recipes, and I'll often find a great recipe. I'll print it out or pin it or do whatever. Make sure I have all the ingredients for it, and then hey, it's an hour or so to dinner time, so let's get cracking on this. And then so I get all my stuff out and I'm getting ready to get going, and I read, and the first instructions are mix these 5 ingredients and then marinate your meat in the marinade overnight. And then, because I didn't do that front end work of reading through the whole recipe and understanding what was going to need to go on, I'm at a huge disadvantage. It is going to be in our best interest to sort of combat that hurry up culture and do the front end work, do the preparation. Next, in our who, what, when, where, why, and how, some of the details that you are going to want to capture definitely are the who. Who made it? Do we know who made it? Who did they make it for? Any details you can find about that. The what is probably going to be one of your longer sections, because the first is going to be just the physical description. You know, what does it look like? What is it made out of? All the details that you can describe. So you're really going to want to spend some time looking at your artifact, examining it. Does it have decorative bits on it? Does it have different sections that all need a little bit of explanation? Just imagine that the person who is reading your paper doesn't have access to the internet, and you are going to have to describe this artifact to them in enough detail that they can kind of visualize it. Okay? So you're going to want to write down as much of those details first, and again, you're going to want to write down as much as you can see on your own, and then if you need to do some research about, maybe there's some decorative scenes or something that you don't really know a lot about and you want to do some research on, then go and research those and jot that information down. We're going to look at an example here in just a moment. So the when, look at when was it made? When was your artifact made? As students of the humanities, you know that it's really important to understand the cultural context. So, for example, if this is a painting that you're looking at, well, we have really different movements throughout history in how do artists think about painting and composition, and what kind of technique are they going to use. So you're going to want a rough historical sketch of the when of your artifact. Like, just quickly, roughly 5-10 minutes research what was going on at this time and place in history. The where was it made, obviously is going to be important to have more context for it. The why, what is the artifact used for? Why was it created? And again, when you're taking your notes, make your best guess, speculate a little bit, write down all the guesses you have, and then go do a little bit of research, making sure, again, that you jot down where you got any of your information. And then the how. How was it created? What is the technology? Sometimes historians learn as much from the technology of how something was created as they learn from all the other parts of our who, what, when, where, why, and how. So you're definitely going to want to include the technological piece too. Now you've done all this wonderful pre-writing. You have all this information, and now you're going to have a think, right? So you've written all this down. You've written as much as you possibly can. So now you are maybe not an expert on your artifact, but you certainly know more about it than the average person, right? So you've written all these things down. Some of it's your own ideas and observations. Some of it is the research that you've done. And now you're going to have a think. What did you learn about the people who created and used the artifact? So this is going to be one of the few times that you will hear me advocate and a first person phrase. So this is where I want you to write down I think people who used this artifact, like what was important to them. I think X, Y, and Z were important to them. I think this artifact teaches us X, Y, and Z about the people or the culture that produced it. Now, when we go in and write the thesis, we're not actually going to use the I think part, but it can be really helpful for your brain just to kind of frame this humanities type interpretation. Okay. So write down a couple of possibilities here. Again, jot this down with your pre-writing. What do you think is important about this artifact? What did you learn about the time and place in history from this artifact? Maybe even just what was new or surprising information for you about this artifact. The most important thing here is that as you're going through and you're doing this pre-writing, and as you're going through and thinking about this, try not to think of it as drudgery, for one. I know some of my students who aren't majoring in the humanities are maybe not a fan of this kind of thinking, but just remember, the more open and the more curious you can be, the more you try to put yourself in a what can I learn right now mode, the better off this is going to work out for you. So just try to be super curious as you're going through and you're writing out your pre-writing, answering all these questions about your artifact. So let's look at an example. Here's an example I chose for you guys that I'm just going to go through quickly. I don't want this video to go on forever, but I just want to give you kind of an idea of how this works. So the first thing I wanted to show you is here's an example of an online museum. So these are the Harvard Art Museums, and there are 3 separate museums housed under the Harvard Art Museums. And the example that I chose that you just saw on the slide is from the Fogg Museum. So here it is. This is what's on the slide. And the really nice thing about finding these pieces in a museum is that you can usually get a couple of different angles on them. Like here's a side angle of our artifact to help with the physical description part a little bit more. And then as you scroll down, you're going to get lots of good information that you're going to need for all the things that we just talked about. And almost all museums have this now. So the MoMA, the Met, almost any museum you can think of, unless they're really small and private and maybe don't have the funding to get a website going, but that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. So take advantage of this. This artifact is a hydria, which is a water jar from ancient Greece, and the title of the picture, or the subject matter of the picture that's on our water jar, is Heracles as Musician. So remember, got a little reminder here for you, that as you're going through and writing your paper, whenever you're talking about the title of a work of art or the title of an artifact in a museum, you always want to italicize those titles as you're writing them out. So to go through quickly, for the museum context, I would make sure that I gave the title of the piece. So this is our Hydria water jar, Heracles as Musician. This is from the Harvard Art Museums, specifically the Fogg Museum, from the Ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern Art Collection. And the exhibition in the Mediterranean collection is called Greece in Black and Orange, because we have a lot of these types of pottery in all different shapes and sizes from ancient Greece that come in this kind of orange and black coloring. So our who, while some of the black and orange pots have signatures from prominent potters and artists of the time, or maybe the artist had a really distinctive style, so it's kind of easy to figure out which ones belong to them. Many of them don't, and so a certain artist hasn't been attributed to this particular hydria. We don't know who it was made for, but it was likely made for a special occasion, because the Greeks didn't often use pottery that was quite this elaborate or ornate for everyday use. So the what is, this is a glazed terracotta pitcher with 3 handles, and I would talk about the handles, how the side handles are horizontal to pick it up, but then the handle on the back that we saw in the profile is a vertical handle, almost like for pouring a pitcher. There's a scene painted on the front, and it is 16 1/8 inches tall. And then I would go into a description of the scene. So again, this is where I would try to write a description of the scene just based on like what I can see with my own eyes. And then obviously you're going to want to do a little bit of research about this one. So this is, and we get a good clue here, right, because of the title, Heracles as musician. So Heracles is the Greek name for Hercules. Most of my students are more familiar with the Greek mythology of Hercules, which is the Roman pronunciation of Heracles. So as we look on our image here, you are going to see that we have this part up top is called the shoulder of the hydria. And on the shoulder we have 3 pairs, so 6 total warriors. And this is going to tell us a lot about the kind of weaponry, the kind of clothing, and just general historical information about warriors in ancient Greece. Then on the main part of the vase, we see these 4 figures here. And one thing I did discover in my research is that on these pots, typically the figures that you see that are all in black are male figures. The white figures are the female figures. So if we look, our middle group here, the black figure to the left of the middle, so third from the right, is Heracles or Hercules. He is kitted out in weaponry, right? Because we know from mythology that Hercules or Heracles had to go through the 12 labors to prove himself, which was a lot of fighting. But he also has a stringed instrument, which is right here. He's holding up in front of him. And this is called a lyre. It's a stringed instrument, kind of a really far back grandparent of a guitar. So the white figure that is facing him, so second from the right, that's going to be Athena, the goddess of war. She helps Hercules a lot in mythology through his labors. Behind Athena is going to be Hermes, who is the herald of the gods. He also helped Hercules or Heracles in his labors. And then behind Hercules, the 4th figure back here from the left is Hercules's or Heracles's 3rd wife, Deianira, who accidentally poisoned him, as it happens. So that is our what. When was this made? We have the date from the museum. They have dated it at circa 510 BCE. So circa means approximately. And this would make sense because if we now, I remember I told you when you get the when, you need to look at sort of broadly what's going on at this time and place in history. So the Greek Empire lasted for a long time, but typically we call the period between the Persian Wars and the death of Alexander in 323 BCE as the Golden Age of Greece. And it's called the Golden Age, even though they were always at war during this period with the Persians and the Athenians, with the Spartans, and everybody's fighting all over the place. This is the period of great achievement that the Greek Empire is known for. This is where the philosophy, the democracy, the math, all of the great theoretical things that the Greeks did, mostly were concentrated during this era called the Golden Era. And the 510 falls kind of at the beginning of the Golden Age of Greece. So that's important for us to know. Where? If we go back and look at the museum marking, it says in Attica, and the Attic Peninsula is not a term that we use anymore really geographically, but it's a historical region that includes the city of Athens. So this is where historians and archaeologists think that this pot was created. So why? So we've made it through who, what, when, where, and now we're at why. The hydria was a water jar. So it was used to transport water, but then the pitcher handle, that vertical handle in the back, was used to pour water because they mixed water with wine. Their wine was really potent, and it was kind of considered that only like the lushes drank straight wine. Everybody else mixed it with water. So that's what you would use this pitcher for, was to mix your water with your wine. Also, the why was, and we get this kind of from the story as well with Athena. There was a festival for Athena every year, and every 4 years was a major festival for Athena. So we kind of get this, maybe why it would have, the hydria would have been painted with this image of Heracles with the lyre, maybe celebrating Athena or directly interacting with her, because in a lot of the stories he's not really directly interacting with her like he is in this image on the pot. So we know that this kind of ornate pot would have been used maybe for special occasions like a festival, that it was used for mixing water with the wine, also a special occasion kind of thing. And how. So this is how was the pot created. And it's kind of interesting. They had a 3-step process to creating the black and orange collections. The first stage of the process was the terracotta was painted with a liquid clay that they called slip. And they would paint it, and then they would put it in a kiln, and they would heat this kiln up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is when the terracotta would turn red. Then they would crank it up some more to 950 degrees, and that is where everything that was painted with the slip would turn kind of glassy looking, kind of shiny. Then they would vent the kiln and let the temperature come down and the air circulate, and the oxidation of that would cause the glassy looking slip to turn black. So they had a fairly elaborate process with the how of how was the pot created. All right, so now let's pull it all together. Voila, a thesis. So for me, if I were looking at all of my notes, I would be thinking, I would be writing those I think phrases. What do I think this means? What do I think was important about this artifact? What do I think was learned? Like, what do I think there is to learn about Athenian Greek culture at the height of the Greek Empire from this hydria water jar? So remember that for those of you who are a little more science oriented, if it helps you to see things in sort of a mathematic formula, here you go. So a thesis statement equals a statement of your topic. So in this instance, it would be the specific hydria water jar with the story of Heracles as musician, plus your interpretation of the topic. So my interpretation of this kept coming back to ritual and belief of the ancient Greeks. So the thesis that I wound up coming up with, because I wrote down all of my I think statements, then I lopped off the I think part because you don't actually need or want the I first person in academic writing. So the thesis I came up with is the hydria jar with the images of Heracles as a musician is one of many examples that demonstrates the importance as well as the details of ritual in ancient Athenian life. So the last step now of our whole process is you go back to all of your pre-writing, and this is why it's important that you wrote just kind of as much as you can. This is like a brain dump, like a throw up on the page, everything that you know or can find out. So now you're going to go through, now that you have a thesis statement, because you don't need to really put every piece of information into your essay. So now you're going to go through your pre-writing, maybe with a highlighter, or if you've typed it up, you can highlight that way. And you're going to go through your pre-writing, select all of the details that help to explain your thesis or your interpretation of the artifact. And then you can create an outline where you try and keep all of the like things together. go through the who, what, when, where, why, and how, decide what information you want to present, what information is going to help you talk about what you learned about the artifact in terms of examples that demonstrate the importance as well as the details of ritual in ancient Athenian life. And then I would kind of ditch everything that I didn't really need for that, and I would keep all of the great information from my pre-writing that applies to this thesis statement and structure that into an essay. And once you get it kind of outlined in the order that you want to talk about it, it's going to be really, really easy to write it up. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I am going to sign off now because I don't want this to run on too long. Please make sure that you subscribe if you are interested in more tutorials for college writing about the humanities, history, your composition classes, or if you're just interested in writing in general. So thank you, my tribe of scribes, and I will see you next time.